Yep, it looks like we're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development community. Thanks for joining us today. Let's see. We've got a nice group of audience members in the chat. Martin started it out 5 hours ago. And Mercedes is here, Rick Hammer, Samar from Lebanon. Wow. And Dion from Vienna, Austria, and many, many more. It looks like so great. Looks like that folks are actually really interested in microlearning. So before I get started, one thing I want to mention is next week we have one of TLDC's bigger events. It's called Ideal 22, which is the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility for Learning event. If you go to IDEA for Learning, IDEA, FOR learning.com. You can register for that free event. We're going to be talking all about inclusion, diversity, equity, accessibility. I've got I think 9 speakers right now. And it happens all week. It's free. It'll be in the AirMeet platform. It'll be a great way to start out that holiday season. The speaker lineup is absolutely fantastic. So if you're at all interested in that, please join us. Just register at ideaforlearning.com. And so today we have Ali Siddiqui. Did I say that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Excellent. And Ali reached out to me about doing a broadcast to talk about microlearning. And I thought it was really interesting when you had sent me the message and you had said, and I posted sort of this title for it, how microlearning is revolutionizing the L&D space. But then you had also, what were some of the titles you had? I have them over here. What we're getting wrong about microlearning was another one that you thought might be appropriate for this conversation. And then can microlearning revolutionize workplace learning? ? And then how can we design microlearning experiences that drive workplace learning? I thought it was intriguing that you had given me that, that set of titles potentially for this conversation. And also you're a former teacher and instructional designer, now work with Coursera as a senior product consultant in the R&D space. Mm-hmm. And yes, indeed, I have purchased a few Coursera products in my life. And I think they were good. I can't recall exactly. I know I bought them, but sometimes I buy courses sort of like the way I buy books. But fantastic, and it's a learning platform that that I know about also because I work for O'Reilly Media, which is also a learning platform that sells courses. And so it's great to have you here, and especially someone from Coursera to talk about this topic. And so what I'm not quite sure, do you want me to sort of stay in chat or on screen, or do you have slides or anything, or we're just going to have a conversation about microlearning?
We'll have a conversation. There aren't slides, but we'll touch on some key points and things like that.
Okay. All right. Let me go ahead. I'm going to just hide myself and kind of let you take it away, and I'll jump on whenever I have anything that I want to bring up, and I'll be watching chat. Okay.
Yeah. We'll keep it really conversational with everyone in the chat as well. I mean, we don't want it to be too much like a TED Talk and more like a conversation between everyone. So
sounds good. Yeah. Okay. Go for it.
Perfect. Well, I think like Liz was saying, one of the main reasons why, microlearning has really surfaced and come up to be such a hot topic right now is because, at the end of the day, I think one of the things that a lot of instructors and teachers are noticing is that, student attention spans, it's just like a anecdotal sort of thing where everyone's like, they're not paying attention as much, and they're kind of distracted. And, it's not just students really, even in the workplace. I was reading an article recently where people are saying that people get interrupted every 11 minutes in the workplace, moving from one task to another. And so there's this idea that if we construct and continue to construct learning experiences that are very long, we may lose a lot of people. And that's a very big deal because, one of the things I was reading recently is one of the primary driving factors why people leave their jobs is because they don't feel like they're upskilling. They don't feel like they're getting better at their jobs. And in the L&D space, it's very important to kind of, upskill people. And the reason why, when you dig into it, the reason why a lot of people are not upskilling in their work or not taking additional training and things like that, it's because, the primary factor, and you can kind of think about it in your own life, is that there's not enough time. So people don't have enough time to kind of, consume those extra trainings and things like that. So I think there's a survey by the, this team of like learning and development professionals, where they're saying like there's about a whopping 94% of people said that they would prefer micro learning experiences to traditional time consuming e-learning courses. And that's a staggering number. There was also, an industry view report that said they surveyed about 385 employees, and 50% of those employees said that they would use the company's learning tools more if the courses were shorter. So all this to say is microlearning, I mean, the reason why we're talking about it is because it's having some really real business implications for a lot of companies. So because traditional courses are just taking way too long, people aren't engaging in them. People aren't engaging, they don't feel like they're learning in their jobs. And that's leading to a lot of turnover, a lot of people leaving their jobs. So in a way, micro-learning is now being positioned as the thing that can help curb this turnover. It can help upskill people while they are kind of working. So that said, I think, what I'll do is, I want to spend a good amount of time, answering questions and things, but I think, just a little bit about, why I'm speaking about this right now, it might be helpful to get some context. So in the past, just recently actually wrapped up two kind of big projects on microlearning, developing microlearning experiences. So one, which has recently been publicized by Coursera, it's called Coursera Clips. So Coursera launched 200,000 short video learning experiences on their platform. And, although it's only available to a certain segment of users, the whole idea behind that is how can we get people to start actually using and learning, the skills that they need to on the job? How do we make it as easy as possible? So that's something that I did recently. And then in the past, I've worked with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to create online science education courseware. And, that courseware, we designed it, some aspects of it to be microlearning based, where you're learning something like, the effects of microgravity on the human body, but you're learning it in small miniature microlearning experiences. So over the course of these two projects and probably half a dozen other microlearning experiences that I helped create for other organizations, there are some key things that I've learned that I feel are key, and a lot of things that people feel like people are kind of missing out on. So I'll go through them briefly, and then we'll kind of open it up for some questions. And as I go through them, I think one of the things that I'll emphasize is what's kind of the learning science behind it, and kind of what does the research kind of say about that. So first and foremost, microlearning experiences, I mean, at the end of the day, what are they? I think at the core, and since, so many people tuning in are, have like a teaching and learning sort of background, at the end of the day, it really comes down to choosing a crystal clear learning objective for the topic. So what that means is not only do you have to choose a learning objective that is the right scope for a microlearning experience. So if we're talking about an experience that's 5 minutes to 10 minutes, you probably aren't going to have a learning objective that is learn Python. You know what I'm saying? Like it needs to be the right size. So what specifically are you doing, or what specifically can you accomplish in 5 minutes? That's key. I think one of the biggest things that people are misunderstanding about microlearning is that they think that you can take a really large sort of topic, and as long as you just cut down each, just cut it down into like 5 minute pieces arbitrarily, that you'll have like microlearning. So the key thing here is microlearning is not just about being short. It's not just having like a 5-minute video. It's about designing something to fit within that small time frame. So you want to choose a learning objective that can be taught in that specific time frame. So that's really important. A lot of times, in my experience, and according to a lot of others that have worked in this microlearning space, one thing that really sticks out is choosing a topic is very important. So typically, people will choose items that are applied, so things that you can apply. Usually, less theoretical things that sometimes are best reinforced through repetition. Sometimes people use it for foreign language. A really common example is Duolingo. It's an app that maybe many of you have heard of, but it really kind of teaches a really small chunk in their like 5-minute or so microlearning experience. So that's the first kind of piece. So the first piece that we're learning about microlearning experiences is that you have to choose an objective that's the right scope. And it's preferred to choose something that learners can apply. So when you think about your learning objectives, think about action verbs where people are applying something. Is typically the way to go, less on the side of focusing on theory of something. The second piece about microlearning, aside from the objectives, is this big piece about time. Time. Like, what is the ideal time for a microlearning experience? There's so much research out there about the ideal time being 6 minutes. I think there's even an article published about like the myth of 6-minute attention span that learners have. But I'll kind of mention two things. So, according to the learner research that I've conducted in the past, and according to some research articles, and even talking to some other folks that work for L&D at big tech companies, I'll say the ideal time is to keep things less than 10 minutes. There is a study by the Rapid Learning Institute that said that 94% of their learners prefer modules that are less than 10 minutes in duration. And I know that even at Coursera itself, Coursera recently published a report called the Drivers of Quality Report, and they always opt to keep their video lectures in their courses and things under 10 minutes. And then they say that boosts learner satisfaction by 16%. So, there are some points over here where we're seeing less than 10 minutes come up a number of times. But I spoke to one of my colleagues just last week, Grace Dover. She's a manager of instructional designers. And her team is responsible for creating all sorts of microlearning experiences to upskill, the workforce that they deal with. And she would say to design content no longer than 4 minutes. And, according to her, when we were talking, really she was saying it's all about reducing the cognitive load and keeping things as concise as possible and hammering in the key takeaways. So, I think even people like say learning in stretches of 3 to 7 minutes matches the human working memory capacity. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, especially because lack of time, according to like Forbes, there's an article where lack of time is like the biggest barrier to workplace development. So, so I think that's something really important to keep in mind. Keep it less than 10 minutes. So far we've talked about choosing the right objective, keeping things less than 10 minutes. And then I guess the question arises like, what do you do in those 10 minutes? And sometimes, it is true that microlearning could just be one infographic. It could just be like one video. However, in practice, you want to make that 5-minute to 10-minute sort of experience as engaging as possible. So what one of the things that you can consider is to try to, instead of providing like walls of text, to kind of vary things up. So include visuals, include a little bit of audio, a little bit of video if possible, and yeah, wherever possible, infographics, visuals over text, but just be really strategic about shifting things up and not just hitting people with one kind of mode throughout the entire experience. One thing that we can kind of learn from, like in terms of, you know, UX design, there's a principle like Miller's Law. And it says like the average human brain can only hold 7 ±2 pieces of information at a given time. So, the amount of information, that you kind of can hold to actually work into your long-term memory is limited. And UX designers use this to kind of limit how much they show on a web page, for example. It's something that instructional designers can use as well. You don't want to overload your screens or overload kind of whatever you're showing learners, when you're designing this microlearning experience. A really good example over here is Google Primer. It's an app. I would recommend to everyone, to kind of check it out if you're thinking about how do I create like great microlearning experiences. What it is it's an app that kind of teaches about marketing and Google Ads and things, but they're really strategic about how much text they show you on any one screen at a time. I think there's no more than 2 sentences per screen. And then talking to my colleague earlier, they have this principle of whenever they do microlearning experiences, learners should never have to scroll on their phone. It should be no more than 5 sentences per screen. So really, yeah, I think the link is out in the chat, but I would really encourage everyone to kind of check that out. But you want to, even like, if you are trying to apply this to, maybe you're not doing online education, maybe you're doing in-person education. So one of the key things to keep in mind there is if you're kind of delivering a training, to kind of every 3 to 7 minutes, shift it up, maybe add a breakout room or, kind of switch the modality. Remember, keep the learning bits bite-sized. And that's kind of what we talked about so far. So objective, keeping that in mind, keeping things less than 10 minutes, and then keeping content bite-sized. So not overloading the learner within those 10 minutes. And that's pretty much, at the essence, what microlearning experiences should kind of be like. I think the last piece is how do you kind of close out a microlearning experience? So there's 2 key things here. Number 1 is summarizing the learning. So at the end of the microlearning experience, no matter what your learning objective is, at the end, you always want to have a summary of what are the key takeaways. In all the microlearning experiences that I've worked on and have seen, this is like a constant. And I think it's partly based off of the UX principle of like, the serial position effect. So the human brain tends to remember things at the very beginning of an experience and the very end of something as well. And so that, having the key takeaways at the end of the learning experience, it pulls on what's called like the recency effect. People remember kind of the thing that they see last. So you really want to make sure that you're adding those key takeaways at the end, really closing that learning loop really nicely. So that's how you should end a microlearning experience. And if you want to take it one step further, I would say add in a little assessment. I'm not talking something really extreme like, 20 question quiz, short answers and all that. No, it doesn't have to be that much. But one thing to get learners to kind of apply what they just learned. And, in the learner research that we've conducted in the past, we found that, for learners in specific domains, that makes a big difference. They want to actually apply it when they learn something. For those that are working on topics that, are maybe soft skills like feedback or leadership, things like that, I think an important thing to keep in mind is at the end of your microlearning experience, if you're trying to get learners to action something, to do something, or to change their behavior, an important thing to keep in mind is maybe at the end of that learning experience, you want to give them something to do, right? You want to, it could be a small sort of action, but you want to kind of close what's called this intention action gap. So people maybe they learn about feedback. They're like, oh my gosh, I learned so many great things about feedback. I can't wait to be giving feedback. But then at the end of the microlearning experience, there's nothing, right? If instead you kind of add it at the end of the microlearning experience, hey, why don't you, provide a small piece of feedback to, a coworker? It could be positive feedback or something like that. It then kind of closes this intention action gap because you're giving people a prompt to do the behavior. And so there's also, there's this idea. So when we talk about L&D, the L&D space, a lot of times people talk about a Kirkpatrick model, and how we can actually get people to go from learning to actually applying to leading to business results. And one of the models that kind of underlies how do you get people to actually take action after learning something is the FOG behavioral model. Definitely something to look into, but the summary of that model is that in order for someone to actually change their behavior or do something, which oftentimes we want to happen in the L&D space, we want people to change their behavior. They need to have the ability to do it, which is what the microlearning experience should give them. They should have the motivation to do it, something that they should get from the experience as well. But then they need a prompt to do the behavior. And so we want to provide that at the end of our experiences as well. So a great way to do this is to add a prompt, but people also have people do a reflection question at the end. Like, how can I incorporate this? I've also seen that as well. So that's pretty much it. All in all, what we've talked about with microlearning experience is really nailing down that objective, nailing down, a time, which is less than 10 minutes, keeping things bite-sized and varying things. And then when you end your experience, summarize kind of what you've done and what you've learned, the key takeaways, and then, get learners to apply what they are learning. And that could be through an assessment, and it could be through an action that we want them to kind of take. But that's, in essence, what I have seen in my time working on microlearning experiences. And, like I said, there are some really great examples out there that I'd encourage everyone to check out. If you aren't already hooked and addicted to Duolingo as a language learning tool, check that out. And Google Primer, I think, is a great example as well. Yeah.
No, that's great. That primer is something that I definitely want to play with. Oh, let me make sure my audio is on. Yeah, it looks like it's all good. I want to call out, let's see, Mercedes had posted in chat. Mercedes said, it sounds like building the case for microlearning experiences based on an L&D strategy that values the learner or human experience and moving beyond compliance in some cases. This is where I imagine some would need to focus before investing in building the experiences. No, that's a great comment, Mercedes. And I do sort of want to come back around, Ali, and ask you about some examples of good micro learning objectives. Like if you're creating an objective, how do you know it would be appropriate for micro learning? Like, say you have some subject matter that you're wanting to build a course around. How do you ensure that micro learning, that the objective is the correct one for micro learning?
Yeah, I think a good framework for this is to think about, go back to Bloom's taxonomy. And it also, with Bloom's taxonomy, you got those lower tiers where you're having people define, comprehend, and up to apply. And then you have those higher tiers, just evaluation, creation, and synthesis. So if your microlearning experience is assuming that learners are new to a particular topic, you'll want to choose learning objectives that are kind of more aligned with the lower three. And there is something to be said about, building, a chain of microlearning experiences that can go up Bloom's taxonomy. But if you're just starting out and you're assuming your learners don't have a strong background or previous experience, I would say, going with those action verbs that kind of limit you to the bottom three of Bloom's taxonomy are a pretty good way to start. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, and so your background, teacher, instructional designer, right? You've done
Mhm.
both. How
Yeah.
about your sort of your evolution into, or how did you learn to, like, what happened? Like, what, how were you all of a sudden um in this situation where you had to create micro learning experiences? And how are you able to develop this stuff, and how did you learn it, and just that entire process?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. When so I remember when I was teaching, high school. This is maybe over 10 years ago. High school chemistry and physics on the south side of Chicago. The teaching blocks that I had were an hour and a half long. So you had a group of 30 students. You had them for an hour and a half, and really very early on in my teaching experience, I learned, yeah, this is definitely not going to work. Like, you cannot, for children, you cannot just give a straight like lecture for longer than, you know, 10 minutes tops. So kind of trial by fire was the way that had started. By the time I finished though, one of the things that I really learned is like, how do you shift things up, like switch things up in a very consistent sort of way throughout the entire class period. So really the origins of that I mean, did it end up turning out to feel like a variety show where something is changing like every 15 minutes? I mean, something like that. But that's kind of where it started. But then when I transitioned into instructional design, that same sort of principle persisted of learners' attention span, learners' commitment to continue and persist in the learning experience. I mean, we know that MOOCs were kind of heralded as like the savior of like online education. We solved it. But the completion rate for a typical MOOC is what, like 5%, 7%,
Yeah.
something extremely low. So again, we found that we had that same issue. How do we kind of keep learners' attention and engagement throughout our process? And so one of the things that we constructed early on is kind of these micro learning experiences, and to kind of combat that, to kind of keep people hooked, engaged, and give them kind of a feeling like, hey, we're getting somewhere, we're accomplishing something, and that's a really powerful feeling. And I think that's been a really powerful driver. And then I think one of the ways to develop the skill of creating great micro learning experiences is um, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of UX designers. And I think there's a lot to be said about the UX of designing in education. A lot of what makes something really successful and not, and one of the things some of the things that I talked about, they really pull on some of these principles that are used in UX design as well. Miller's Law comes up a lot, the recency effect, and things like that.
Yeah, it feels like we don't, I know with TLDC, I had a UX playlist a couple years ago where I kind of just had a small mini event where we talked about user experience for the whole event. But it feels like there's really a need there to bring more UX into the daily sort of active working lives of all L&D professionals. Very interesting. So this whole question about TikTok and just social media in general moving, you've got what, Instagram Reels, YouTube
Yeah.
Shorts, you've got all this stuff going on. Has that evolved the way that micro learning is built or consumed or anything like that? Have you noticed, since you've been working building micro learning courses, it changing to sort of I don't know, to meet the trends or stuff in popular media?
Yeah, this is interesting. It's like um maybe it's like the chicken and egg situation. Is like, is the popular media kind of adjusting based on how we are? Are we adjusting because this is how popular media is now packaging content? Um, I think there is something to be said about uh TikTok and Reels and YouTube Shorts as like potential ways of learning. I actually remember someone had reached out to me with a business idea of, I got this. Listen to this pitch. And it was like, what if we strung together a bunch of TikTok clips and turned it into like a course, but a course on TikTok? And I was like, Okay, well, you know what? Going back to these principles, what's the most important thing is like how much are you trying to teach in each of those bites? And actually, I think you can pretty effectively learn things, learn skills from something like TikTok or YouTube Shorts or Instagram Reels. I think it's just like thinking about what is the scope of what you're trying to learn, and can you do it? Now, the one thing is for a lot of skills, just watching a video is not enough. And so to actually like master it, you'll need some practice. And so no matter how many Instagram reels I've seen on poaching an egg, I'm really not gonna be able to do it unless I actually get out there and do it. So they can definitely take you. And actually, I have like younger, cousins and things like that, and they'll probably laugh. But like they are using TikTok all the time to learn things about like whether it's wedding planning or like how to make floral arrangements or like how to do XYZ. And they're effectively learning this content, and I asked them like, well, how did you learn how to do this? Like obviously on TikTok. So I wouldn't dismiss it. I think a lot of people are easy to dismiss some of those things, but there is something to be said about how seamless it is to get into these experiences, how easy they surface, to your attention, and then how short they are and how narrow in scope they are. And it's not just like floral arrangements. People are learning really important workplace skills. Like there's a TikToker, Corporate Natalie. People are learning like how do you actually give feedback? How do you communicate? How do you manage up? And so that's a very real thing that people are learning. I don't think we're doing enough in the L&D space to actually capitalize on some of the great kind of learning experiences that are coming out there. Because I think we're just easy to dismiss them as like, that's just TikTok, they're just dancing. So, yeah.
No, that's very interesting because I do see there are a couple people like I know Vanessa from Anchored Training has been talking a lot about TikTok, and then even there are vendors out there in the industry like Seven Taps who kind of has it's a micro learning platform that is somewhat popular in our community. So it's interesting to see that. Okay, so we've talked about all these different things, and I want to wrap it up with this one. What are we getting wrong with micro learning? Like, what are the things you've talked about what we should do? What about the things that you're seeing that we definitely should try to avoid when we're building out these micro learning courses?
Yeah. One of the things so there's a couple of things. Well, okay, I think of three things. So three things. So number one is how seamless the experience is. I think one of the things we're getting wrong is we're trying to create micro learning experiences without thinking of the barrier to entry. Having your micro learning experience somewhere deep in the crevices of your LMS that takes, I think the average, LMS content, it takes like 7 to 20 clicks to get into. But if you think about some of the most effective micro learning experiences, 2 clicks, you're there. 3 clicks, you're there, So one of the things that we're getting wrong is where we're positioning it. We have to think beyond the learning experience itself. I think this is one of the biggest things we're getting wrong is, okay, we are learning designers, we are instructional designers, but we really have to think of the whole user journey. So no one's ever going to get into your experience if it's not positioned in the right place. So that's the first thing. Mobile is a great way to get over this. How to make it mobile friendly. It helps minimize that friction. So that's a huge part. Another part is the learning objective itself. So we talked about this before, but I think the big misconception is people in your organization might just say, yo, just here's a 3-hour course. Snip, 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 cut. There you go. Micro learning, done. But that's so the misconception here is it's all about time. It's about time by design. So you have to design the experience to fit in that 5-minute chunk. You have to close the learning loop in that 5 minutes. You can't just randomly cut a long video and make a micro learning. Otherwise, then all of YouTube, because now they have chapters, is like a micro learning thing. So that's the second piece. And the third piece I think we're getting wrong with micro learning is how we actually do it. People get so hooked on the time that they're like, here's a 5-minute article. Ta-da, micro learning. But I think the important thing is, how do you keep people's engagement within even that 5 minute, within that 10 minute? So shifting the modality of how you present information is key.
Mhm.
And there are studies about you know learners' attention span, and the common idea is, we kind of referenced it earlier, is like, after 7 minutes it's going to tank. But actually, there's other research to show that there's a huge drop off after the first 30 seconds, and then after 5 minutes there's another drop off, and then after 7 to 9 minutes another drop off. So shifting the modality of how you present information will help prevent that drop off throughout the course of your, say, 10-minute experience. So that's the third thing I think that we're getting wrong, is we're just keeping things one modality, getting too hung up on the time part and not about how we're actually engaging learners throughout.
Nice. All right. And I know I said that was going to be my last question before I wrapped it up, but I do want to ask this one too. Um, where do you see micro learning evolving any further? Do you see it changing at all? And the reason I'm asking that is because I'm just seeing more and more activity from the AI side of things. Like, for instance, I'm seeing platforms like this one, like Crowdcast. Well, this specific platform isn't doing it, but other platforms are integrating AI into the recordings, where the AI will like will shorten the recordings so that they're they're more,
Mm.
digestible or whatever. And so do you see anything in in that vein where micro learning is going to take any are there any trends that are happening to micro learning where you see it changing any more in the next few years?
Yeah, I think the main trend that we're noticing is the kind of the widespread sort of adoption of micro learning. And it's actually going beyond just the L&D space at the workplace, but even with things like the common like lifestyle dieting app or whatever, Noom, for example, like when they're trying to teach you kind of new things about your diet, etc. Those are all turning into micro learning experiences. How Squarespace, for example, teaches you how to kind of get used to their website. That's also turning into a micro learning experience. So I think that the general trend is we're moving away from these large. I think when it comes to immediate skills that we need to apply and immediate skills that are needed in the workplace, we're moving away from these large courses on leadership into extremely specific micro learning experiences on what exactly do I need to know, and then how can I apply it. And I think that's the real trend. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that, um, that kind of content that we would typically see on something like social media
Hmm.
start to become bundled into some very real learning experiences that you might not expect to see in like a more formal setting. So
Right.
I think they're onto something there. I think it very much matches the way that we want to learn information in the in the state of doing something, just in time learning. And I think we should just get ready to embrace it and also be able to utilize it in whatever
Right.
context we're in.
That's fascinating because I can imagine, since TLDC is really focused on helping instructional designers and L&D professionals in their career, but if you have a focus on micro learning and being able to build that type of content, potentially uh, there might be a lot of work out there for you. Because I know for myself, whenever I do get it, like a new app or like especially on the no code side of things like Webflow, I get thrown just these
Mm.
really short form, less than 3 minute, very engaging sort of tutorials on how to do things, and I really, really appreciate that stuff. And it sounds like even with Coursera and Coursera Clips,
Mhm.
um, it's definitely going in that direction.
Yeah, I can think of yeah, just in the L&D space, it's just getting more and more popular. I can think of a couple of examples, like the Chan Zuckerberg Institute. They had funded something that we worked on that was teaching teachers how to introduce metacognition in their class. But they're like, we don't want any lesson in this course to be longer than 5 minutes. So we had to kind of teach metacognition to teachers in a 5-minute, learning packet, a micro-learning experience. I know there was another brief we got once when I was working at this design firm, which was, listen, we have young millionaires and they're Ubering from one building to another building in the city. We want a learning experience that they can complete in their Uber ride from one building to the next. Make something like that. And I'm like, this is oddly specific, but it is a real example. It's like people are craving shorter and shorter content. And it's just like, we just kind of really need to figure out, how to design for that. So it's a very real thing, and we're starting to see it a lot more. And yeah, it's just having these principles in mind will help us kind of navigate that when it comes up.
Thanks, Ali. I just want to say what I really appreciate about this conversation is, because I have been, I remember micro learning, sort of the word micro learning popping up like a decade ago, and seeing, at events and places like that, it became like a buzzword,
Mm.
like micro learning this, and like all of a sudden that was kind of like the hot thing to talk about was micro learning. And it got to the point where I'm just like, it's just shorter courses. And it was so like, it was kind of annoying because, it was really, it felt like all of it was just like a money play. But you're really taking it from where it's evolved to a very practical application. And I definitely want to have more conversations like this to actually see micro learning like that works in action, right?
Mhm.
So no, thank you for joining us today. Rick has one question here. Let's see, are there specific software platforms for developing micro learning?
Yeah. With some of the people that I've spoken to, people use things like Lessonly. I've seen that before. Personally, I've used, so once I was working at a company where the goal was to train nonprofit leaders across the globe, and to provide them with free courses. One of the biggest things that we learned from that experience was, surprise, no one's really using their desktop when you're talking about providing nonprofit like experiences to people who are in the rural areas of Malawi, for example. They're all using their phones. So we had to convert all of our experiences into mobile-friendly micro-learning experiences. And so one thing we used for that was a software called EdApp. So that was pretty good. It does help you build micro learning experiences that kind of match some of the best practices we talked about, keeping things interactive, minimizing the amount of text. So I would check that out.
Cool. And so I did post a link to Lessonly, and then there's a link to Seven Taps that is really interesting. Seven Taps occasionally will run like contests and stuff through the TLDC chat, through our Slack workspace. There you go. Cecilia is saying, see one called How To with great templates. There you go. And there's Ed App from Ollie. Thank you.
Mhm.
Wow, this is really interesting. I might hit you up again, Ali, to talk about this more, just because I do feel like it has evolved to a point where it's just, I mean, it might be something that most of us aren't even aware of anymore. Like it's just, anytime that I'm downloading software and wanting to learn it, there are just these micro learning experiences that I kind of take for granted now that weren't there, say, like 5 years ago. And
Right.
that's an important part of what an instructional designer should probably learn or need to know how to build and to make their to blossom in their career. So this is great stuff. Yeah. And so let's
Yeah.
see. Oh yeah, Cecilia's posting about Gene Lee. Yes, I've heard of Gene Lee. Gene Lee.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm not even going to try to say Genie Lee. So this is great. I am looking forward to being able to break this one down in a transcript and kind of take. I'm going to pull clips from this one too, Ollie, because there's so
Yeah.
many things that you said that was really useful. Oh, here we go. One more question. This one's from Cecilia. What are some best practices in utilizing micro learning principles for compliance training for healthcare? Any ideas on that one?
Yeah. Utilizing micro learning experiences for compliance training for healthcare. I think one. I was actually reading a case study about a group, a new I think they're a startup, and it's called, I think, Arist. So correct me if I'm wrong, but what they do is they actually they had a case study where they were working in the healthcare field, and they provided, I think it was surgical technicians with text-based microlearning experiences that they get on their phone. So like SMS-based, microlearning experiences. And they've had a lot of positive results with sending people like a really bite-sized piece of information that they need for their role. Maybe the same can apply to compliance training, but they really utilized the same framework within text messages. I think there's a stat that like people are like checking their phones like once every 3 minutes or something like that. So the response rate, that seamless UX is definitely there. But one thing that's really come up in healthcare, especially, is the use of checklists and kind of having your microlearning experience, yes, but then providing people with a tool that they can always refer back to, and that giving them access to that or having them check in on that regularly and utilize it has been really effective as well. So that's something that I'd probably keep in mind, or just have in mind as you kind of think about designing those.
So for compliance in particular, being able to refer back to something might be considered a best practice.
Checklists, having something solid that you can refer back to as an artifact that you can keep with you. That's something that's really anchoring, that can really help people. So I think that's pretty helpful.
Right.
Yeah.
So, oh gosh, we've got more stuff in chat, but I do actually have to wrap this one up. But Ali, where do people, how can they, do you have a podcast too, or what? I can't recall. What, where can people reach out and find you?
I would just say on my LinkedIn, people can reach out to me over there, kind of learn more about my work. I think maybe next time we'll do like a deep dive into an actual microlearning experience. I'm usually the visuals and PowerPoint guy. So this is kind of a novel experience where it's like, wait, we're doing a podcast, but I can share my screen. So next time we'll keep it a little bit more visual. Do as I say, not as I do. Switch up the modalities, give some people some visuals. But they can learn more about me through there. They can reach out. Always open to help.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. Had some great questions in the chat. Really appreciate you taking the time. For those of you that celebrate this week, I hope you have a good holiday week. And don't forget, next week we have the Ideal 22 conference. You can register at IDEAFOR, ideaforlearning.com if you want to join us for our week-long event. It's free, taking place next week. And with that, Ali, I'm sure I'm gonna follow up with you, because this was great stuff, and I really want to continue exploring this one.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Louis.
All right. Bye, everybody.